All right. Thank you for being here. Graffiti poet, performance and visual artist, among other things, Leslie Reed. Thank you.
Good morning, California time. Hello.
Yeah. Where do you think your muse lives when you're not engaging with it?
Ooh, what a fine question. Um, I actually think that my muse is it's a combination. It's internal. It's in my heart, but it also um speaks to me very much in nature. And so I think that my muse may waft around in the trees near here where I write my poetry. And definitely I have encountered the first time I encountered it really strongly was on the beach in England. So it's in natural settings that it unfurls and just really begins to talk to me.
How do you how would you describe that interaction then?
Um, I think probably the best way that I've been able to articulate it is there's a book by Elizabeth Gilbert. And in that book called Big Magic, she talks about an American poet, Ruth Stern. So Ruth Stern would hear poetry coming over the hills at her farm as a girl when she lived, I think it was Virginia, and she would run into her room and grab a pen and write the poem that she heard. But if she was late, like if she was way far from her house, she would stick her pen in the air and pull that poem down onto the page, and it would come out word for word backward. So I read an article about Ruth Stern before I went to England. Eventually, I found Big Magic, where Ruth Gilbert articulates that story again. But before I went to England, it was like, um, I wasn't really clear what that would be like. But when I heard these things that were not like my thoughts on the beach in England, the wind was blowing so hard and the waves were crashing and the light was low. And I just remember like hardly being able to hear my own thoughts. And I'm one of those people who definitely hears an ongoing set of thoughts. And then I just started to hear these lines of poetry. And I was like, okay, I was forewarned. And I was living where the white cliffs of England were. And so on that beach, there was always chalk. And so I grabbed some chalk and I went over to the seawall. They build these beautiful seawalls so you can walk along the coast. And I just started writing them down. So the interaction was an urgency of like, these words don't seem like mine. They seem like they're important and I need to take a record of them. And then it gets really intense. Like I get to the seawall or I get to my fence here, and when I'm hearing it, I hear the first line. And as I'm writing, the second line is coming. And then the third line is starting to come. It's like one line at a time. And I'll hear the rhyme, but sometimes I really don't know where it's going. And so I'm just like, where's it going? Where's it going? And it's kind of panicky. It's kind of a like, oh my gosh. And then uh every once in a while I have to take a step back and reread what I'm writing to get the gist of it again. So it's an interaction where it's like I feel compelled to just take dictation. And I have a poem about that here in Berkeley, and I can share that with you later. I don't have it pulled up, but it's about how the words that will appear on the fence are giving dictation, and it's this funny dialogue of the muse comes out as these words and these senses.
Do you take notes when just in the normal part of the day, if you have ideas like that that come to you, do you write those down either like in your phone or on a notepad?
I do. I actually I'll write them in my journal. I'll write them into my phone. It really depends what is on hand. So sometimes I'll be walking up to the fence here, which is about a 15-minute walk away, and I start hearing the first lines, and I'm like, oh no. And I'm like, I'll recite them to myself. And sometimes that's enough to retain the start of the poem so that I know the rest will come. But then sometimes I'm too far away from the wall. So I just get my phone out and I start writing it into my phone, and if I need to, I will sit down and I'll just take the dictation there. Sometimes poems, really beautiful ones, will come along when I'm home, and I call those journal poems. So it's like I've engaged the muse enough that I don't always have to be in nature. Um, but sometimes the muse is just, I just got to tell you this, there's a poem for you here. And they're so personal and soothing, and other people find them to be soothing as well. So it's been an interesting process.
Yeah, my interaction with poetry is different than other writing. Like even a song, I think songs and poetry are similar, but I think it comes from a different place. And I can tell if I'm writing a poem just from what I have experienced and what manifests through that inside my mind, and when I'm connecting with somewhere else. And I
Mhm,
visualize it as also a forest or woods, but it's more of a forest at twilight, and you
mhm,
walk through it, and whatever happens, happens. So it can I get those moments during the day where you just have a line pops up in your head, or you think about something and it's just there, and you write that down, and I've not written it down enough to know that I need to write it down. So I don't want to miss it. So I write it down, and I usually put a date and a time with it just to kind of organize it for later. And I'll end up with pages of notes from different lines. Sometimes you get a whole poem, sometimes you get a few lines, and then other times you have to put them together later, and they could
mhm,
be strewn across months of just notes where you're like, well, this one is something, but it's over here. And eventually that stack gets a little more, and you're like, oh, okay, these all belong together. And then it forms something that after you're done, and maybe when you're writing it, you're not even understanding it. But after you're done, you're like, wow, that's something. And then you come back and read it later after it, after you've recorded it, and then you go do something else and come back and read it, and you can see the meaning more clearly. And
mm.
it's, I don't feel that any other type of writing than poetry. Poetry is different to me than anything. So I do feel like it comes from something outside of us. And my visualization of what it's doing when I'm not engaging with it, I do wonder about that sometimes. Like, is it just sitting in an apartment in a robe, eating milk and cookies, just like waiting for me to go, oh, like give it some attention? And I often, at the beginning of the poetry stuff, I thought, I I'm going to do this poetry book, and then that's it. I'll go back to writing regular science fiction or whatever, and the poetry will run its course. And I think that once you get to the point where you can interact with that muse or that wherever poetry is coming from, that it gets so used to talking to you that it just feels like it can do it whenever it wants. So you can try to engage with it and you're always successful, or you can try to ignore it, and maybe it will ignore you, but most likely it's going to check back in periodically and just say, hey, by the way, what do you think about this?
Mhm.
What do you think? Is that similar to your feelings of poetry then?
Yeah, it was. It was kinda like I opened up to it, on the beach there, and the first ones were really feisty. I was in a really feisty stage of my life, and I felt them shift. I felt them really shift and deepen and become very spiritual and instructive in not just sort of reflecting like, like some sort of external version, some sort of like, social media post type of a feistiness that was coming at first. And and then there was a time there've been times where I've just not felt like things have been hard, and so I've just shut off to the voice. And then it'll just come back and it's like, "Oh no, here's a poem. Here you need to write this down." And mine don't come like, I like the idea of that coming in snippets, and then you kind of sew that together like a quilt of a poem,
Mm.
the way that comes for you. Mine are just like, write. And like you're going to write until you're done. And it doesn't really
Mhm.
matter what else you had on your mind. You are going to write this down. And then it's, as you say, it is not something that's coming out of my brain. I do have some poems that I sort of muscle out of my brain. I might get a line, and then I sort of am thinking my way through and processing my way through the magic ones, the muse ones, the ones that are the most powerful. I don't know what it's going to say. And then when I'm done, I'm like, wow, okay, thank you. And there's an intensity of those, almost like maybe my brain tunes in best some days, or I surrender best to it. And those poems are just like, they're such a treasure. They're such a treasure. And other people get that. Other people get the soothing and the insight. And, so I don't edit my poems is another thing. I have this
Hmm.
lovely friend who's older than I, and when he was at Harvard as an undergraduate, he was on um, the poetry section of the newspaper. And so he would say to me, "Yeah, you don't need that last line." And I'm like, "Oh
Hmm.
no, these are a gift. These are a gift from the muse. I don't cut out the lines." And the thing is that, some of the lines that he said you need to cut out, that was when I thoroughly understood what the poem was telling me, what the muse was giving me. And so I don't edit those. I just let them be, and I'm just figuring that that's okay, that they're raw, and they work as they are.
Would you classify your poetry more as verse or free verse, or how would you describe it?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I did study that stuff in high school, and I did a lot of literature in college, Russian and French literature. I know there's a rhyme and there's a strong sound to them when I read them out. I live 3 blocks from UC Berkeley, which is really a treat. And so I go to the undergraduate poetry club and I read my poems. They read their poems, and they're often talking about like just this sound that runs through them. I don't. I think free verse might mean that there's no rhyme scheme. But
Hmm.
since it's being dictated to me, I really don't have. I'm like not coming up with A, that sonnet sort of rhyme
Right.
scheme. So I can't really say. But sometimes there's not a full rhyme all the way through, whereas other poems, every line rhymes or it picks up a rhyme from earlier. So um, I'm just fairly unstructured and allowing this muse to speak through me.
Yeah, I would call Emily Dickinson um, free verse, where it's
Okay.
more of a stranger type of poetry. That's what I. I mean, I can write a rhyming poem, but I don't think it's coming from the place the poetry comes from. For me, I think that's me writing it instead
Mhm.
of something else, like being the antenna or the conduit. So it's
Mhm.
oftentimes strange in words and like ordering of words that is not how I talk. So I know it's different,
Yeah.
but I don't. I want to say it. I'm short of being possessed. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's a demonic thing, but I think it's
Mhm.
a. I think about a lot, and I have a lot of poetry about connecting with that place that poetry comes from. And
Mm.
I think it, for me, is like a place between worlds. And
Mm.
that's why when I think about a forest, I like the saying that you can only walk halfway into a forest because then you're walking out the other side after you're halfway through. So
Mm.
to me, that's what this place is. It's this space between existences, layers
Mm.
of world, of reality, or whatever. And it's where whatever's on that other place meets wherever I am. So
Mm.
we're both kind of doing the same thing for each other. I'm not sure what I'm giving to the muse other than maybe an ear to listen or, a way to express what's happening, that poetry. But that's how I visualize it. Do you think about that, like where it comes from or what it is?
I really enjoyed what you just said, and I think what I think I'm giving is access. I mean, I'm a spiritual person, but not a religious person. And one of the people that I like to follow says that we are all expressions of the divine, and we are allowing the divine to express itself here on earth through what we do when we will open to that. And that's what I feel like is going on.
Mm.
Is that there's this creative idea, and Elizabeth Gilbert in Big Magic touches on the idea that, like, she says she thinks there are ideas running around the earth just as much as there are people, and then they're looking to meet a person, and to be expressed. And so I think it's some combination of these. Like, I don't feel like I need to have a definitive to be comfortable with it. And because it has come to me, like to you, over and over and over, I really am at ease with it. And one thing I know is it's a benevolent force. It really is a benevolent force. And because it's always provided me a sense of comfort, or even healing, or deep understanding of something that was extremely difficult for me. Um,
Mm. Yeah, I think there's the spiritual element of it, the religious element, whatever you want to call it, the whole existence of here, and it does feel like, if you go with the idea that we're all one and we're just
mm,
collecting these perspectives of humanity, because if you were a all-powerful being, how would you feel vulnerable? You wouldn't feel vulnerable. So you break yourself into all these other little shattered pieces, and you go out there and experience things from many different perspectives. So then you understand it. So I think that's the point of living, is
mm,
experience and perspective. So
mhm,
I think that definitely matches into my view of poetry, but it's it, it makes me think about things like music and the tone of things, where if you're looking in religion and they talk about angels singing, that I think about, what is an angel? Is an angel part of this one thing? Is it a creation of the thing? I don't need the definitive answer to any of it. I'm just thinking about it. And it makes sense to me that there's music, or a tone to poetry, and a tone to a divine language, because you're trying to take a thing that is everything together and communicate with a little piece of it, and I don't think it can fully. So that's how
mm,
you get this poetry. It's a feeling. There are words. It resonates with everyone, or it can resonate with many people. Some people maybe not, some people more than others. And that's how you're communicating with this thing beyond us, that maybe is all of us together, or
mm.
everything together, but it's trying to comfort, guide, enlighten, I don't know, whatever, us while we're in this place of limited capability to understand.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's so funny that you said an angel singing, because um, I have a friend in Australia who's very interested in angels, and she uses AI to draw angels. She gives it orders, and then she creates this art. So I thought, you know what? I heard a recording um, of an angel singing, and so this morning I looked it up. And so it's this guy who was he was just singing for a spiritual thing. Let's see, he's called Jason Upton, and Jason Upton sings with angels. The song is called Fly, and the man who was doing the recording was like, there's an extra voice in here. And some people
Mm.
who were present were seeing an angel of 12 feet tall behind Jason while he was singing. So it's kind of fascinating, because it's actually capturing in human, machinery, the sound. And those sorts of things I find inspiring, because I do think that life is incredibly mysterious and multifaceted. And I don't know. I just really enjoyed your explanation, because the thing is, I think it's easiest that it not be perfectly described, but that it be a sense. That it be a sense.
Yeah, I think about, because I write about angels just in regular science fiction writing, and I often think about, how would an angel, or a ethereal being, communicate with someone that is so much less, or capable of understanding so much less, maybe not less, maybe just different. I mean, if you're going with if a religious idea of we're in the image of God, or we're all one, so an angel might be different, might be the same. I don't know.
Mm,
But I think about how they would communicate and how an ethereal being would communicate with a human. And I don't think it would be a language. I don't think it's just words. Certainly it could be, but I think it'd be more of taking everything you've experienced in your life, whether you remember it or not, and ordering it in such a certain perfect way that the idea it wanted to convey was conveyed without any issue. So
mm,
it's a personal message to you, whether
mhm,
it's pictures or feelings that you've ever had, maybe some that you don't remember, maybe past lives if you're into that thing, but that's how you would get communicated with, and it would be instant and you would understand it. And I think
mhm,
there is in maybe Hindu or something like that, some mythology about a warrior. This is way back philosophy class. I can't remember all of it, but a warrior questioning this all powerful being. And then the powerful being touched it on its head, and it knew, just touched with the tip of the finger on their head, and they knew everything, and they were completely enlightened. And I think the communication would be that easy. The problem is, as a human, you're limited in your understanding of things. And I think you're limited on purpose, because if you knew all that stuff, it would ruin the experience. It would ruin feeling all these emotions that we look at in life and go, how come there's so much happiness, so much pain, so much suffering? Is you're not going to get that if you can do whatever you want. So that's the reason you're here. And if you knew all the other stuff, this would be ruined.
mm.
But I
Yeah,
think
and there's an
poetry taps into that.
evolution of our understanding. Pardon me. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Go
I
ahead.
think there is an evolution of our understanding, and the funny thing is that actually I paint angels. I make icons as one of my is the thing I do with my visual art as an overview, and I've been making angels for quite some time, and yeah, so they sort of are very communicative in a way, the pieces, and icons themselves are intended to be communicative. I mean, when I studied Russian undergraduate, and then I got to go to Moscow, and this was before perestroika, before the Soviet Union fell, right before, and I got to be in a church in Moscow. And the fascinating thing was that when I was in the church, it was quite empty. There were a few old ladies with their headscarves on. People call them babushkas. And the
Mhm.
priest was waving this incenser. And it was full of this wonderful incense, but I did not grow up with that. So it was quite intense for me. And then we started to pray, and they would do the cross with their fingers clustered like this. So everything there was striking. But then when we prayed, I did my thing as a kid that I learned as a kid, and I closed my eyes, and I closed my eyes and listened to this prayer in Russian that was in an old version of Russian. So I was not even following it, but I had a feeling of it, right? And then suddenly I was aware how crowded this church was. So crowded, and crowded up to the ceiling of this very high church. And I was just sort of in this long, long, long prayer, and then I finally opened my eyes, and I was like, there's really only about 10 of us here. What was that feeling? And then I looked at the walls, and they were covered with icons. And in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, the icon is there for that presence, to look through the eyes of Mary, to look through the eyes of Michael, Archangel Michael, as he or she is painted. And so I'm convinced that I was feeling the presence of these spiritual beings coming, because honestly, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most crowded church I've ever been in. And I opened my eyes, and it was like, whoop, hardly anyone here. And so I've really loved painting angels, and I don't paint in a way that does like have the eyes looking, but that's the tradition in the Eastern Orthodox, is really have the eyes looking straight out at you. But I bring in the presence of that, and the presence of the benevolence. And I've actually just started doing something. I don't know if you know what this is, but I went to UC Berkeley, listened to the kids reading, and they said, we're having a fun trip to the museum. We're going to learn how to do ekphrastic poetry. And I'm like, nice new word. Ekphrastic
Hmm.
comes from Greek. What it means is poetry that's inspired by art. So you go to they were going to go to the museum, they were going to look at what was there, and then they were going to sit down and write poems. And they have a very intellectual process of writing their poems. But what I've decided to do, and I've just launched this, is a series that's my own ekphrastic. So it's got angels and some of my poetry, because some of these poems just speak so clearly to people that I want to put them out in places other than in my own book and other than on the fence. I want to have them more available. So I'm creating a series of a collection of ekphrastic pieces. And it's really fun for me. It's really delightful to find a way to get my poetry out farther, because I do feel it's a gift. I always feel that these are given for me. They help me heal. And then, I mean, people that I've met that went to readings at the Poetry Fence here in Berkeley, they've said, you helped us get through the shutdown with your
Hmm.
poetry. And I was like, you're kidding, because I didn't know anybody was reading it. I was just going up there by myself and hearing these poems and writing them down. And they're like, no, these really, there's a gift in them. And so whatever muse is speaking through me, it's it's something bigger than me for sure.
Have you ever had the fear, or was there any time where you had the fear that you wouldn't be able to connect with that it would be over?
Um, yes. If I was going through a lot when I was in England, and I was starting to write the poems, and there would be weeks where I couldn't write a poem. And I would think, I can't do that. And then I would go through this struggle in myself, and I'd feel like, okay, yeah, you wrote those poems and those were pretty good. I knew they weren't really mine. So even saying they were good was like not something I should own. But and then I would like kind of just be beating myself up. Oh, you'll never hear them again because you're in such a struggle. And then I would just like let it go, like, okay, fine, those poems are never coming again. Then I'd get to the beach one day and I would start hearing a line, and I just grab that chalk and go over to the wall. And it's similar with the fence here, because it's actually become kind of known and kind of popular a little bit. It's like a poetry installation. I have over 70 poems here. And so um, it's become a little intimidating. Plus, I've almost filled the fence. And so I had a poem come to me recently that talked about, no, you're going to still hear from us. You're still going to hear from us. It's going to be fine. And a couple of poems have come recently. But I do, because I'm a visual artist, and maybe this happens to you because you write other kinds of things. A friend of mine gave me this image. It's like there's a line at the door of what ideas can come through. So if I'm painting a lot, the poetry doesn't necessarily come through. But if I'm writing
Mm.
poetry, I don't have any visual images, because the muse that I have, maybe there are two of them, but they used to send me back from the beach in England to start doing paintings. And they'd say, put up the paper here, use this color, draw this, draw that. And so, one muse or the other will be talking, but I've never been writing a poem into a painting, or that would be really cool, or drawing,
Mm.
on a poem. I've decorated a poem, but um, so yeah, sometimes there's been nervousness that it won't come back, and that this gift is over, because it really is a treasure to have it.
Yeah, I felt that especially in the very beginning, where I was like, well, I better listen while I can, because this is not going to last forever. And then I've gone through a phase where I was like, well, this is always there and it won't be quiet. I can't I can't not write this stuff down. You have to write it down. And
Yeah.
usually after you write it down, it's done for a little while. It's not there all the time, but
Mhm.
there are times where you're trying to sleep and it's like, nah, you're not going to sleep right now. You got to write this down. And because you have that, or because there's that worry of forgetting an idea, maybe from just not poetry, but just writing a line or something else where you didn't write it down, so you didn't remember it, and you're like, oh man, that was a great idea and I don't remember that.
Mhm.
That part of me is like, no, you have to write it down. So it's easier now than it used to be before the iPhone, where you can just grab the phone and type it in versus the middle of the night, you have to turn on a light and start writing it down. And then I had this piece of technology that changed the game before the phone, which was a pen that had a light in the end of it. And it wasn't a bright light, but it glowed and you could
Mm,
write by it. And that was great because then you didn't have to turn the light on and you could kind of still ride that halfway asleep, halfway awake time to
mm,
maybe communicate with that poem a little better. But it, the worry of it going away, I don't have anymore. Just now, when we started talking about it, I get a little concerned because I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to be like, not, I don't want to not worry that it'll never go away and then it goes away. So I guess I'm still concerned about it, but much less than I used to be, to where
mm,
it's one of those things like going and taking a walk somewhere. If you want to connect with it in the real world, you could find a way to kind of connect with it, or in our world. And then just in your head, you could go, okay, this is what I'm going to do to connect with it. Whether you're visualizing walking into a forest, whether you're by a stream pulling out buckets of ideas, whatever, that you can still do that and connect with it. So I find it reassuring that it's there. I'll be worried if it's ever not there, but I don't really have a concern of it not being there.
mm. I'm not sure that I've ever managed to like go to a stream and pull out ideas. I think it always comes to me. Um,
Mm.
and so I have to be a receiving I have to be willing to receive. But I definitely do have moments where it's where fear comes in. It's like maybe it won't come back. Maybe the fence is too full. Maybe too many people are coming here. So the energy has changed. It's not this quiet, peaceful place. But then it comes again. And another place that fear comes because I write with a permanent marker on a fence. England was easier. It was chalk on a wall, and I could grab wet sand and I could like erase something if it didn't work. But once I let it go, um, it does flow. Um, but there can be fear, like especially because when I go to the fence, one of the things is it's a physical response to the poem. So if I put my arm up really high, like well above my head, I'm like, oh shoot, it's going to be a long poem. And then I'm like, oh, will I receive it? Will I catch it? Will I, and then I just keep going. So, you know, I think when I can set any fear that arises aside, I don't know if it's like this for you, but the magic of receiving a poem, there's almost no equivalent. It is just this divine flow where the words that I've learned as a kid, the language my mother taught me so well, it all consolidates through these ideas. And I'm just like more alive than in any other way, you know? It's not
Yeah.
even like getting my favorite dessert makes me feel that good. It is bliss. It is just bliss. And so, um, I suppose for that reason, there's a little, there could be a little fear creep in, like, well, will I ever have that wonderful bliss again? But it seems to be a gift that's larger than me. And so when I allow that, it seems to just let it keep coming.
I agree. It does feel larger. The fear is not there. When you were talking before about it being benevolent, I agree. I do worry that there is the opposite force of that somewhere. I don't try to tap into that. I don't want to. I have had poetry that I wouldn't call it mean, or it's just uncomfortable. It's the emotion of it. And I can read it now, still feel the emotion clearly. And then sometimes I read it and get a different feel from it. So that's, I like the idea of poetry being alive like that, where different people can get different things from it. You can get different things
Mm,
from it. You could see something in there, pause in a place where you didn't normally in your mind, put a comma and a period in there or whatever, and it changes the whole thing of it. And other
mm,
times you can still I can still go back to a poem and it talks to me. Like if I'm trying to rearrange it in my head and it's like, no, 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 that's not it. This is the message is this. And
Mhm.
then you go, but it could be this. No, 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 that's not the message. If you want to think about that, here's a poem about that. And you go off
Wow.
on there. But I do think the muse for different arts is different. So I'm not sure if we're connecting with a larger singular thing. I don't think it is. I think it's more of a connection with a bunch of different segments of something that are each have their own personality and views. So that's the strange part of it. I don't know. That's how I think about and discuss strange poetry is the strangeness of it. I think it is strange.
Mhm. I would not have expected myself to be a poet. And it's not that I didn't study poetry. I had a really good high school English teacher. I did Russian undergraduate and French graduate degree. And so there was a lot of poetry strung through there, but I never imagined I was going to be a poet. So the whole thing is rather a surprise. And so it is kind of strange. And for a long time, I've just said, this poem came, and then finally people were like, why don't you own it? Just own it. And I was like, okay, this poem came through me. All right, that's my poem. But I hold very loosely to that. It's almost like your child. Like yes, they came through your physiological um, presence here on the earth, male or female. Part of you contributed to create that child, right? Um, but you don't own them, and like it's that same level of like attachment, detachment. Like, wow, look at that! That's really cool. My daughter can climb that wall on those scale that wall, and she's really cool, and I can't do that. And the poem is like over there pulling together words that I know into something like I'm like, wow, that's cool. And that makes me feel soothed. That makes me feel seen. That gives me a sense of guidance. Like that's how my poems are. And sometimes they come back and they pester me. They're like, hey, Leslie, you're feeling stressed. Remember, the dance is called from the inside, one step at a time. That's not the exact line from the poem, but the dance is called from the inside. It's not about like, you can predict exactly how life is going to go and you can make this particular change in your life in a way that you can control. The dance is called from inside. Like you're going to go left and then you're going to go right and then you're going to jump and then you're going to turn, like
Hmm.
it's like being at a square dance. Do you ever go to a square dance? And they
Been at a square dance.
that's
Yep.
sort of the image that came, and I was like, well, that's helpful because I didn't know I was going to promenade to the left. But apparently I need to promenade to the left to get to the next place, and my poem is the vehicle for telling me these things.
How do you measure I think the success of a poem is different. I measure it differently for different things. Like if you're just saying, is this a good poem? Then you read it. If it resonates with you, it's good. And if it doesn't, even I could say, I don't get it, but I don't not like it. But commercially, like how would you measure the success of a poetry book or
Mm,
something like that?
mm. I think I've kept out of the commercial for probably to protect the tenderness of this connection so that it strengthens. And now it's become such a body of work in a way that I may be ready for that. But I think the funny thing is, like, I wrote a poem on my birthday one time on the fence, and I was like, okay, yeah, there's a poem. And then I ran into a lady maybe a year later, and I said, oh, are you reading my poetry? And she was like, yeah, you're the poem, the poet. And she said, my favorite is this one. It was the birthday poem, and I was like, well, hey, okay. So um so the poems seem a lot of times to be coming for me, but I think they come for a broader audience. Um and and so what I'm doing, I guess, with my work is preparing to get it out commercially in such a way that I'm really managing, like, no, I do not have to be writing a Shakespearean sonnet. I really do not have to be writing poetry that has been seen before, but like to create it. And I think it's kind of new the kind of poetry I write.
Mhm.
And so commercial value, I've really tried to stay away from people approving of it on a commercial level. Um, but that's the edge I'm at, is like, how do I move it forward? Because I really feel like it's not just a gift to me, it's a gift that needs to be shared. Um, and so there are ones that do feel stronger, but as I say, sometimes I write something and then other people are like, that really helped me. And I'm like, oh, okay, I thought that was kind of dumb. you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
I'm reluctant at times to explain what I think a poem means because I don't want to mess up what somebody else thinks it means, but I want to hear
Mhm,
what they think it means. So that's interesting. With commercial success, I would point to just poets in general, maybe the
mhm,
classics more of a Whitman or something, not really so famous in their lifetime, more famous later when like Leaves of Grass with him always adding to it, and Emily Dickinson with her stuff published after she is dead. But I think like I read Leaves of Grass and there's one or two poems I really like. And then there's some lines in there that I like. And I think that's a success for a poet. If you put
mhm,
a book together and there's 100 poems in it and a person likes one poem out of that 100, I think that's a
mhm,
success. That poem reached them through everything else is amazing to me. And even if there were just lines that you could remember from a poem and you liked it,
mhm,
then I think that's a success. Like in G.I. Jane, where Viggo Mortensen's character is reciting the Wild Things poem. You know, I've never met a wild thing that felt sorry for itself. That I think that's a success. I don't know the poet's name, but I like the line, and I'm sure I could figure it out and look at more of it, and I have in the past. But it's it's strange to me how poetry connects with some people more than others, and I think that's just across the board with creativity. And I think that shows that there's different muses and different sources of all different types of art and creativity because it's so different. It's so varied from varied people.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a great measure of success, is where it can make an impact to some degree. And I think, having been, in a corporate environment, I was in healthcare philanthropy. There was, oh, I'm sorry about that. There was earning in ways that are very different than what a poet is going to have in most cases. And so I think I've with my poetry, I've taken fully off the pressure of commercial as in financial success, even though
Right.
I'm willing to welcome that. And so I'm, as I build what I call Leslie Reed Art Studio, where I do the visual art and do the poetry, I'm also, doing some teaching and some classes so that my poetry can just live very aesthetically as itself and not be formed for a public audience. If that makes any sense. It just, I think I treasure it so much. It feels so pure. When I can really align with that muse, it's like, that's not stuff that I want to subject to, the editor and to the critique.
Yeah. Sorry. Just taking a quick note. What you
Yeah.
just said about it made me think of the muse said dirty poetry, not dirty as in dirty like adult, but dirty as in you're taking this pure thing and you're making it dirty by commercializing it or changing it
Mhm,
to suit some vast audience. I think that also fits in with the not wanting to change the lines where you say, no, this is the line. I can't take that off. If you're going to
mhm,
take that off, you're going to change it all. So that's interesting. Maybe something to explore later as
mhm.
far as the idea of poetry being sullied, I guess would be a better word
Right.
for it.
And I do, like, I have a poem that's right over here on the wall. There are what I call journal poems that I edit, and so they are not in that same purity of I'm just transcribing what I'm hearing. And so there are two different versions of poems that come. And this poem is really beautiful to me. But I did go back into it and press the words around a little bit, change a few of them to get the feeling that it launched me into. Um, but the ones that I'm taking dictation on, I don't want to edit those. And I think it's off to ask me to take a line out
Mm.
to make it fit X journal more appropriately. And so that's where I'm like, I resist the idea of commercial success if it's going to request that I edit my pieces, because that, like, I've written a memoir about my mother, refinding my mother. I was estranged from her, and then got to know her again after her death, in a way. Um, that book, yes, I'm willing to have some edited to some degree to help refine the thoughts, but I can't with the poetry.
Yeah,
It-
I get it.
yeah.
What's the best way for people to follow your work or to, yeah, keep up with you?
So on Instagram, I'm at Leslie Reed Art. So Leslie underscore read underscore art, and I think you'll have it
Okay.
in the links there. And
Yep.
if you ever want to hear me reading, I was found by a man who created a spoken poetry website called Voetica. And so he asked me if I wouldn't read for his website. So that will be in the link too. It's called Voetica, and I'm poet 1038. And you can hear me read. And then,
Okay.
yeah, through Instagram, you can reach me. I'm starting to teach classes on how to use creative inspiration for personal healing. So I'm teaching a class right now called Soul Canvas, and that is one where I'm teaching people to use creativity to process things like the death, say, of a parent or the loss of something. And so that's you can reach out to me on Instagram, direct messages. My website's under construction, and when I
Okay.
have it, I'll send it to you, and maybe you could sneak it in at the bottom of
Sure.
our podcast conversation. What a treat
Definitely.
this is, talking with you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. I know you have other things to do on that side of the US. Um, I think I follow you on Instagram right now. If not, I'll make sure I do. But
Great.
thank you very much for your time. Great conversation, good insight. Look forward to speaking with you in the future and following your work.
I'd love that, and I'd love to see where I can read your poetry or to have you share a poem or two with me. It sounds very special what you do.
Yeah, it's on Amazon under TR Monroe. There's a couple books, but yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
All those links and everything will be in the show notes, as you said, so people can check that out. And when you get your website, definitely we'll add that.
Thank you. I
Any
appreciate it.
thoughts for closing or anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about?
I don't think so, but I
Mm.
think that if people are, you know, getting a sense as they listen to the two of us that, oh, sometimes I hear something unusual that doesn't quite sound like me, write it down and give it some time, give it some space, and see if a poem doesn't start coming through you, because we're not the exclusive recipients of these wonderful muse voices. There is poetry out there to be heard by others as well.
Excellent. I agree. All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Sounds great.
Thanks.